Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Levi with Mailbox Money here in Sioux Falls, and today's guest is Matt Erfman. Matt was part of the business ownership at Dakota Land Manufacturing, a company his family started about 30 years ago, and he's been a key part of growing it from the ground up into a larger operation serving customers across the region. Matt, thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here.
Of Awesome, sir. I'd like to leave a little bit of room here at the beginning for you to kind of dive into your personal background, where you grew up, and how you got to doing what you're doing today.
Sure. Yeah, so born and raised in the Sioux Falls area. Went to Roosevelt High School, studied business and economics at Augustana College here in town. Yeah, I have a family, a wife and three kids, two boys and a girl. 17-year-old son Charlie is a senior at Sioux Falls Christian.
Oh, wow.
Henry is 14, eighth grade, Sioux Falls Christian, and our daughter Caroline is at fifth grade, Sioux Falls Christian.
I'm sure that keeps you busy for most of the day right there.
Yeah, we stay pretty busy, with sports and other uh, kids' activities, music events. There's a band concert happening tonight, so
There you go. That's awesome.
yeah,
Very cool. So Matt, let's kind of get into your journey in business and everything. I mentioned, Dakota Land Manufacturing, that's a
yeah,
family business. I believe I saw your dad's the one who started it, correct?
yeah. So my dad was one of the original founders going back to 1996. The company was started as Westland Manufacturing, and they were making um, large roll-off containers and other garbage dumpster type materials in the early days, and then kind of branched off into different levels of metal fabrication. Yeah.
Cool.
So back then, 96, I was just finishing up my junior year in high school. So I actually started working for the business at that point, working part-time, doing some production and, a variety of manufacturing tasks early on, and then
What did you
stayed
think of
on.
it back then when you 16? Did you think that was something like, oh man, I never want to come back to work for this place? Did you enjoy it? What was the mind frame then?
Yeah, I didn't think, never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined that it would have grown into what it did. But, as a 16, 17-year-old kid, kind of getting to work with your hands and, um, it's kind of fun. There are aspects, especially when you kind of have an engineering mind, like I inherited from my dad, kind of getting to work with your hands and making something out of, sheet metal that you can see and touch and feel. It's kind of cool.
Good. That's awesome to hear that you actually enjoy it and everything. And then I think you were going to get on to your next part of from that early stages of working there. Where'd that lead into?
Yeah, so continued to work for the business part time through college. Like I said, studied business and economics at Augustana. So, I learned the kind of hands-on fabrication side of the business in high school and early on in college. And then as I came out of college and um, had that business background, that's when we started really trying to focus on growing the business. So leaned on some of what I had learned in school, just in terms of like sales and marketing and business management to help start to grow the business at that point. 2001 is when I graduated.
Were you kind of
And
thinking while you were in college, was that kind of your mind frame of like, hey, I'm going to take what I'm learning here into this business, or did that kind of what was that on an unexpected route for you?
yeah, it was somewhat unexpected, although as I got toward the end of my college career, it became more viable that it could be an actual professional path. But early on, I really hadn't thought that way, just because it was manufacturing and it was pretty small. And, in those early days, there were There were times in college where I was working part-time and we had one other full-time employee.
Oh,
So
wow. It was that
you know,
small at that time, huh?
yeah, it was pretty small. And so it didn't really until I got toward the end of my college career where I could really see a path to growing and participating in the business at a level that I felt made sense given the time and effort I put into studying for um, being in the business world.
Yeah, okay. So then, yeah, you're coming out of college, pretty smaller operation, right?
Yeah.
What were your kind of initial thoughts on how to grow and what did those stages of growth look like?
Yeah, so right away it was just kind of understanding the market and where potential customers were. So really kind of leaning on the sales and marketing aspect of my education. Um, looking through, really, I spent a lot of time looking through. Um, at the time, there were printed manufacturers directories. So books reading through manufacturers in the area. I'm trying to understand what they did and then doing some cold outreach in terms of calling and
Yeah,
we were starting to email a bit at that time, but it was mostly calling and even some paper mailings, just trying to reach out to customers and let them know we were there and we had what we had for manufacturing capabilities and starting to make some connections and growing the customer base that way.
was there kind of like a niche that you guys hit on, like for your manufacturing, or were you kind of tackling all aspects of it, um,
Yeah,
that
it was
helped
pretty.
with the growth?
Yeah, it was pretty niche. So I should back up a little bit. My dad, his interest in the business was related to a project for Sony Corporation. He worked for another manufacturer um, in the mid 90s, and they were approached by Sony about this project in the state of Iowa where they were outfitting the public school system with distance learning furniture. So I use the analogy that it was like Zoom of 1995, where
That's
the school,
interesting.
yeah, so the school system set up cameras and recording equipment throughout the school system to where a teacher in Des Moines could be broadcast, amongst the school network and they had TVs and other recording and broadcasting equipment, which required a fair amount of metal fabricated
Yeah.
hardware. So there were uh, steel fabricated camera arms that would mount the cameras, and there were um, special desks that the teachers would sit at that would have recording and audio equipment mounted into them, and so his previous employer was not interested in that contract with Sony. And fortunately, they were, um, they cared a lot about their employees and seeing their employees succeed. And so he approached the owner of that business and said, "Hey, I've been thinking about starting a business on my own. And would you mind if I went after this contract kind of as a side business?" And they were very supportive of that. So that's really how the business started.
That's
And that,
interesting.
yeah, it
A
was,
Japanese company coming, and
yeah,
yeah, that's very interesting. And then yeah, like you said, the fact that like I mean, you don't think of regular internet conversation and zooming until, talking later 2000, 2010 or whatever. Like, yeah,
yeah.
the fact that that was going on in the 90s. But continue.
Yeah, so that was roughly a 3-year contract to build all this, metal fabricated furniture to support this project in Iowa. So roughly 96 to 99. And as we saw that winding down, I was probably in my junior year of college. That's when I started kind of doing the research, finding potential customers, doing some outreach. And we started to make some connections. So, 2000 or so, we started doing some metal fabrication. So it's a long-winded way to say our niche was kind of sheet metal, fabricated sheet metal and we had powder coating finish that we were using on the Sony furniture, which was somewhat unique to the area, um, and different from paint in the sense that it's a dry particle that gets applied and then baked and
Yeah,
cured on. So,
very cool. Okay, so yeah, we're kind of in the middle of you coming in and everything. What's that next stage of growth look like for you guys?
yeah, 2001 is when I was graduating from college. My dad was still working. He stayed full time with his previous employer because the business hadn't gotten to the point where it was viable, and I was the oldest child in my family, so my siblings were still pretty young, and he needed to provide for them and make sure that there was food on the table and health insurance for everybody. And so in 2001, one of his other partners, um, so there were four partners in total, and one of them at that point decided that the business hadn't really taken off like they thought. There were some good things happening, and so he made the decision that he could pull his investment out of the company and do some other things that he was interested in personally. But what that also opened up was he was a procurement manager for another company here in Sioux Falls that at the time they were doing um, we'll call it hotel entertainment. So, they would set up hotels with video equipment. And so if you're in a hotel, you could, watch movies and have the entertainment on your screen, which
Yeah,
required a
absolutely.
lot of, it required a lot of the similar equipment to what we had built for Sony. With his ownership involvement, he had a bit of a conflict of interest there. But when he decided that he was not going to be an owner anymore, then we were able to support some of their manufacturing needs, which was kind of the next big phase of growth. Um, and that happened probably late 2000, kind of into 2001, as we started, growing that relationship and supporting that for that company.
Hey, that worked out fairly nicely. That someone already familiar with
Yeah.
probably wanting to work with you guys.
Yeah. And so that was really behind the decision, both, for myself as a student finishing up their college career to see that growth kind of starting to take hold, it gave me the justification and the comfort that there was a path to having a potentially successful career. So that's why I decided to join full time when I graduated. It's also the same year that my dad made the decision to leave his other job. So, even though the business technically started in 1996, both of us really joined the company full time in 2001.
Okay. So then give me 2001 to we'll say about COVID time. What was growth like for you guys there? Because you're starting with very few employees. How many
Yeah.
were you adding on then and things like that?
Yeah. So 2001 was a little bit of a tricky year. As I mentioned, kind of our first big growth customer, they were in the hotel entertainment industry. Well, September 11th, 2001, you know, impacted the hotel industry.
Yes,
Um,
yeah, for sure.
yeah, for those that remember, there wasn't a lot of travel happening for several months after that. Fortunately for us, that company was large enough and we were new enough into the relationship to where even though their business was disrupted immensely, they were using other suppliers similar to us to where we were still growing with them, even though their business was shrinking. We were just picking up market share, and
Uh,
so it impacted some of our competitors um, early on to where um, that company was probably doing $2-3 million, and some of our competitors, for our competitors, that 2 to 3 million went down to essentially zero. But for us, we grew to 700,000, 800,000, maybe close to $1 million, which was all new business to us. So it was a big part of our growth story. And really, the travel started to come back, in 2002 and 2003. We were growing with other local manufacturers, the more connections we were making. The next real big moment in our growth was around 2008, 2009. Again, a little bit of a recession happening. There was a company in Mankato, Minnesota that was building large industrial generators. And, as the industry started to pull back a little bit in 2008, 2009, we took the time uh, rather than, um, you know, get concerned about the future or scale things back. We decided to kind of further invest in the business and went through the process just because, from 2001 to 2008 or so, we were just doing everything we can to keep up with the growth and,
Yeah.
working long hours and didn't really have the time to take a breath and kind of figure out strategically what we were trying to do and how we were going to continue to grow. So when the market presented us that opportunity to kind of sit back and look at the business and how we could continue to grow, we went down the path of pursuing and achieving an ISO certification, which in manufacturing is it's a outside body that comes in and says your quality systems are up to a certain standard. So there are, as potential customers come in, they know that they can rely on your quality systems. And around the end of 2008, we had this customer in Mankato who was large manufacturer. They reached out and they said, "Hey, we need more suppliers. We did a Google search. We found you guys, and but we need you to have an ISO certification. Do you have that?" Fortunately, we were able to say, "Well, gosh, we just
We
literally
just
just
yeah.
got the paperwork." And so, that relationship started off small. But again, they were a very large corporation. So, a couple $100,000 in the first year quickly grew into a few $1 million by year two or three. And so, again, it was kind of while we kind of plateaued a little bit in that the Great Recession, coming out of it, it was kind of exponential growth again. Um, at that point, more of my siblings started to join the business, and the other partners had gone away. So we were really, fully owned by our family and
Very
being
nice.
fairly successful, but, started to just operate like some privately held family businesses do, where sometimes the needs of the family trump the needs of the business, or unfortunately, in some of those scenarios, the decisions aren't necessarily made in the best interest of the business, but sometimes there's family dynamics that come into play.
Yeah,
And so,
I was gonna ask, obviously that's a dynamic I not everyone's dealing with, but it's a thing around the Midwest. It's pretty common, that family business and everything. What kind of piece of advice would you give on the family business side of things?
well, I think families that are involved in business really need to uh, openly communicate with each other and understand, um, you know, how they want to balance the dynamic between their family and their business. I think, every family and business are different. So I think that would be the best advice I could give, is just go into it kind of with an open mind and have open and honest communication about really what's going on and how to, you know, navigate all the different dynamics that exist within those environments, and um, try to make the best decision for your family and your business as the best you can.
Very nice. And then you were getting into yeah, kind of what you guys were doing, family coming in, and then that
Yeah.
transition period.
Yeah. So we started to work with some folks that were involved with the Prairie Family Business Association, um, and kind of starting to think through how we wanted to deal with that as a family, and started to put together kind of our, call it, family protocol. And um, we decided that we wanted to operate as a business family and kind of put the success of the business first before. So we kind of changed the semantics a little bit. It wasn't a family business. We became a business family.
Cool.
And with that, we kind of thought hard about how we could set up the business so that our motivations were to make decisions in the best interest of the business. And we explored a few different avenues, and we had different opportunities that presented themselves to us. But one that became ultimately what we pursued was a merger with another group. They had a similar manufacturing company that was in Watertown, South Dakota.
Okay.
And what was appealing to us was, while they were similar, their niche was a little different. We were a metal fabrication based business, and we had started to dabble in the machining world, CNC machining, you know, uh, vertical machining and turning centers and lathes and things like that. So this business in Watertown was kind of the opposite, where they started in the machining side of the business and started to dabble in the metal fabrication side. And we didn't have any real customer overlap. And so it became kind of a natural fit to where, each company's strength was kind of the other company's weakness. And so we put those companies together, which from the family standpoint brought outside ownership,
Yeah.
non-family members. So helped us put together a formal board and really start to operate the business, you know, like a true non-family business. We and at that point we started to hire non-family members, kind of sit on the leadership team. We absorbed a few with the merger. So this was 2015, and that's really
Okay.
where the name changed. So we had operated as Westland Manufacturing, and then when we did the merger in 2015, we created the Dakota Land Manufacturing name, uh, which now both sites use that name.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So then that all happens. Flash forward to, I believe you said it was 2003. You guys actually sold, is that correct? 2003, you sold your majority stake?
Yeah. 2023. Yeah. So 3 years ago. Kind of one other key piece in between here and there was, so 2015 we did the merger that brought outside ownership into our business, and it was a local private equity group, local to Sioux Falls. Great group of people. We were aligned, just in terms of how we thought about business and how we wanted to treat our employees. Um, and then as the pandemic hit, they had some, well, in 2015, the way the deal was structured, there was a put option against their ownership, to where we would have had to buy them out on the sixth anniversary, I think it was, so probably 2021. But as the pandemic hit, we got into those conversations early, and we bought them out August of 2020. So again,
Okay.
2015 to 2020, we had outside ownership, but then 2020, we went back to being essentially 100% owned by my family. 2022 is when my dad turned 70. So we had obviously started to think about how we were going to help him retire. And, again, we explored several different paths. But what we ultimately decided on was selling a majority stake of our company into call it a private equity group, but they're not truly private equity. They're more of the uh, kind of a family office mentality. It's a large
Okay. Yeah.
general contractor based in they're based in Minneapolis, but it's a very large company, and they have part of their organization that goes out and invests in businesses outside of the construction industry.
Very nice.
Um, but what was attractive to us was um, the alignment around kind of that people first focus and really the care for people. And um, that's something that I kind of skipped over a little bit. But after 2015, and we started hiring folks outside of the family to run the business with bringing in director of manufacturing, bringing in a director of finance, and started to assemble a leadership team. Um, in order to get all those team members aligned, we really developed this kind of people first focus of, we were all getting out of bed and coming to work every day, not because of all the different widgets we were building, but because of the way we could impact our employees' lives. And that really, it was really critical in our part of our success story. Certainly, we had a lot of good luck along the way, and um, but the the intent of taking care of our people really helped us make decisions that were in the best interest of the business and all of the employees involved. So,
And at
uh,
this point, how many employed between the two locations and all your guys' other part of the board, and how many approximately employees were are there?
yeah, we're low 150s, like
Wow,
152, 154. Yeah.
that's
Um,
very good for a manufacturer.
yeah. And that was split almost 50-50 between Sioux Falls and Watertown.
That's very cool. And then yeah, just kind of get it now that you built something up, grew it, you got to the light of the tunnel and got to see the fruits of it. What what's today kind of looking like for you, Matt?
So today I still serve on the board. So, doing whatever the business needs. So I stayed on as CEO until January of 25, at which point we hired another CEO. So there was a transition period
Mm-hmm.
there. But really, the last year or so has been serving on the board. And then, I have a lot more time for myself to focus on, um, you know, the physical health. Um, so I like to work out. I was on the treadmill before this call. Uh, got outside for a jog yesterday, so I spend a couple hours a day just kind of focusing on physical health. And then different levels of volunteering. So whether that be, going and helping packing food at Feeding South Dakota, or more recently, I'm getting ready to embark on hospice volunteering.
Wow.
Um, so just trying to find ways to get back to the community. And it's interesting that I didn't realize there's been a process of kind of getting up to date with vaccinations related to the hospice volunteering. So that's been interesting over the last 30 or
Can
45
only
days or so.
Yeah, I can only imagine, yeah, all the stuff that goes into that. Matt, before we let you go and everything, is there any pieces of advice that you'd give to someone who's listening that maybe similar, they're getting towards the light at the end of the tunnel of something that they've grown and worked on? What are your pieces of advice there?
I would say really know what it is that you want and what you're looking for. I think there are a variety of avenues for a business owner to exit, all of which have their pros and cons to all of them. So really sitting down and understanding what your options are and what you want, I think is the best advice I can give. And then hold out for that. Wait until you find it, and don't give up on the. It's not impossible. Sometimes it might take a little longer, but I think ultimately, if you're clear on what you want, there's a path for you to find that for your exit.
Amazing. Well, Matt, thank you for guiding us through your personal journey, but then the whole company journey. It's kind of cool. I don't know if I've had yet on my show something that from basically ground up to in the finishing stages, someone's gone through. So thank you for sharing that with us and our listeners today.
Yeah, no, happy to share my story.
And then for anyone who is listening, if they're seeking for any manufacturing or anything, is there a good spot for Dakota Land that you would send them to see what's going on there?
Yeah, so if anybody has manufacturing needs, Dakota Land, mfg.com is the website. Um, you can go check out what we're doing there. Uh, but yeah,
Amazing. Well, thanks again for your time, Matt. Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you guys on the next one.